Alright, so I'm going to go do a PowerPoint. I recorded one previous video, but that was 20 minutes. I'm going to try to make this one really short. However short this one is, it's just going to be the final video, I suppose. So let's just go ahead and hop to it. I'm not reading off of my Word document or anything like that. I'm just kind of going off of the PowerPoint, just trying to describe what I have here. So I'll just give you some audio cues of what's going on and where I'm at in the PowerPoint. So starting off on slide 2, we're at section 1A, classroom description. So I'm going to be teaching an Algebra 2 classroom at Plain Name High School because that's just like a, I'm not very creative with names. There's 22 students, and there's no serious like learning disabilities or anything with some of the students. Some of them have like a couple of maybe like visual issues or something like that, but it's nothing too serious to affect their learning. So there's 13 male students, 9 female, 14 are white, 4 black, 3 Hispanic, and 1 Asian. 2 students are from non-native English-speaking families, and 5 students are from low-income housing. So they tend to also work part-time after school to help their families, and 1 child is also in the foster care system. That's just kind of like the general makeup of the school, and some of the socioeconomic stuff will come into play with some of the assessment things that I'm doing, more so in just like some of the leniency that I might have with regards to things like homework, but more specifically like the studying for the exam that I'm going to give. So further contextual factors, so this is slide 4, 1C. It's a middle class, lower middle class area of Oklahoma, pretty standard for a place like this. Every student has access to a computer, more or less, or at least like a library. The school is underfunded, but for underfunding for a math program, it's not necessarily that terrible. We're not really that affected by that kind of stuff. Maybe if you're a science program or a music program, you're going to be more so affected by it. But with a math program, you can use textbooks that are 20 years old and it'll still work. They don't need to be that updated, but still, we are still using kind of old textbooks inside of this example. So that might have some small impact, but not a tremendous amount. So on 2A, slide 5, the assessment is a comprehensive final exam for all of Algebra 2. So there's 5 chapters, and it's over the entire thing. It's 1 hour, and there's 15 to 20 questions, which is the amount of questions that's going to be on there is flexible, and we'll get to why it's going to be flexible in a moment. The assessment seeks to measure retention. We'll go over that bit inside of the rubric section. It seeks to measure, so the assessment seeks to measure retention, so students don't forget material, and how well students meet relevant standards. So there are 21 standards on the Oklahoma's Department of Education's Algebra 2 section inside of their mathematics folder. And there's 3 sections that it's kind of divided in between. And it's things like graphing, how well you can understand complex numbers, matrices, logarithms, all that kind of stuff that you probably forgot about inside of Algebra 2 after you graduated. I've certainly kind of, sometimes it goes in one ear and right out the other. But overall, this assessment is going to be worth 15% of the class grade, and it's going to replace the lowest test grade because it's technically a final, so it has a little bit more significance. It's supposed to be like a comprehensive kind of test of all the previous tests. Studying for this test begins 2 weeks prior to whenever the test actually occurs, and there's going to be homework given during that time that correlates to homework that was previously given, and it's not for an actual grade. The homework that's going to be given inside of this 2-week time frame is just optional, that if you do it and you turn it in and you get a better grade on it, then that'll also replace one of the previous homework grades if you need to do that. So it's just a nice way to get people to bump up their score and not to be too concerned about this kind of thing. Because this is supposed to measure retention and how well people memorized their stuff previously, if they improve their score, I think they should probably be benefited by that. Also, by allowing that sort of thing, it gives a bit more of an incentive for people who might be hard on time or something like that, or if they need if they need to study for these kinds of things and they normally wouldn't be able to do so because of financial constraints or time management or something like that, it gives them just like a little bit more of like an incentive to do so, and it gives them more worth for their while. And I think that that's probably a good thing to have for students who are inside of some less than good circumstances right now, especially with COVID. With slide 6, 2B, there's going to be, so there's 5 chapters in the class with a test after each chapter, and And these chapter tests will be basically the comparison for the individual class. So if I see an improvement from the test grades that they got on the chapter tests compared to this final, that tells me there's been an improvement, that they've retained the information and even maybe scored better, or they haven't retained it that well, or they retained it completely consistently, whatever it might be. Also, tests from previous years can act as somewhat of a decent benchmark between what's going on this year and previous years, so that I kind of have some idea of just how they're doing. So these two things of comparing tests of this year to previous classes and comparing this particular classes with final test grade with their chapter test grades is just a decent way for me to understand how they're doing. So this is 2C, slide 7. It's about the rubric. So there are 21 standards from the Oklahoma State Education Department's Algebra 2 section. And the final grade will be based upon a student's ability to meet these particular standards. So each standard met will yield the student 5 points with a bonus of 5 points, because that's just an easy way for me to, divide this sort of thing up. So it's 100 points for the entire test, but there's 5 bonus points if you get it. So each question on the test will correspond to some standard, and in order for the test to be flexible, there are some standards that are kind of obvious that people just kind of inherently get. Sometimes where it's just like, okay, why are we doing this and this and this together separately? So it might make sense to put a couple of different standards together. So an example would be multiplication of complex numbers and multiplication of matrices. These are 2 different standards that are found on their website, on the Oklahoma Education Department's website of standards for an Algebra 2 class. You can combine these 2 together and have multiplication of 2 matrices with complex numbers in them, so that you have some understanding of how both complex numbers work and matrices work with multiplication. So you'd be fulfilling 2 standards inside of 1 question. So if something like that is just easier to do and people are just consistently getting that sort of thing correct, well, I don't really need to know all that much information of what's going right. If there's something particular that I think needs to be focused on because previous test scores have been bad, or it's just something consistent throughout previous school years, well, that might be something to look at. So this just allows for a degree of flexibility with just how it's how the grading rubric is structured, so that I can kind of tweak it around a little bit and find what test would tell me basically what needs to be improved, so I can kind of focus in on that, and maybe even focus in occasionally on what is going kind of well. So students who score better on this test, again, just something that should be part of the rubric is that part of the grade of the class is that this is worth 15 points, 15% of the grade, and it can also replace one of the previous test grades, one of the previous chapter test grades, because it's a comprehensive final. If you're doing better on the final that's comprehensive versus on one of the particular tests for a chapter, I think you should probably be rewarded based upon your improvement for that. So I'm going to give you a certain amount more. I'm going to give you the difference between the final exam and your lowest test grade, basically. So that's 2C. Let's go to slide 8, which is 2D. So each question, this is evidence and data. Each question corresponds to some standard, which means that with some partial credit in mind, every question is given some numerical value out of 5, which entails every standard is given a similar value. And this test also measures retention mostly, so if there is a discrepancy between it and prior chapter tests or grades from previous years, that would serve as a signal for the teacher to re-examine either their rubric, their lesson plan overall. This is a very kind of like wide breadth of an assessment, but it's a good way to end the semester or way to end the year, so that okay, this is something that worked here, but it didn't work here, and we need to go over this thing and not this thing. It's just a good way to just get a general kind of recap of everything. So going on to the reflection section, 3A, slide 9. So the assessment is a final, so it's not meant specifically to guide each particular class further, because it's something that's taken at the end of the year. So you can't really go farther than that. But it's a good way for teachers to look back at previous finals that have been given, so that they can adjust the class for the next school year, basically. So this is not something that will necessarily help every individual classroom, but it's something that will help classrooms over time. It's kind of like a long haul kind of thing. Um, so it's meant for like a long-term kind of advisement. However, if you go to uh, slide 10, 3B, alternate assessment, there are some smaller versions that we could think about with this. So an example would be if you use previous, if you're, say, having a test on Chapter 3, you might include some material from Chapter 2 just to jog the memory of the student. You might have a couple of pop quizzes now and then about things you learned maybe like months ago, just that kind of stuff. Just ways to get people to remember things that they previously learned, so it's not just 1 year in 1 year, out the other. It's just a way so that people maintain things that they've learned previously that they might be forgetting. That's sort of a common thing in math, and no one can blame them for doing that. But that should bring me to the end of my PowerPoint on slide 11, and slide 12 has my works cited. It's just the Department of Education URL basically with a citation part to it. And that should conclude my presentation. It went a little bit overboard. I started around minute 1 or so, and I'm now concluding at minute 11, so maybe about 9 or 10 minutes of speaking. It's a little bit hard to condense this amount of material just into this time frame because I wrote like 11 or 12 pages, which is just a lot for this sort of project, I guess. But I felt it was necessary, and I think that this was the only way that I could really get all that material inside of. I tried to get all the material I could instead of as a concise space as I could. This is my 3rd time recording this, so the previous 2 were 20 minutes each. So I'm just going to stop right now and stop this before it gets to 13 minutes. It's already at 12. So thanks for a nice semester, and I'll see you sometime in the spring. Thanks for watching this.